That was for you.
Both of us, I think, Sami.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is amazing. We've got a full house here, which isn't really a surprise to anyone.
It is to me. Yeah.
Should we flyer them right now for the comedy festival shows?
I think jokes aside, I think someone is going to do that.
All right, good, excellent. Before we begin, as always, I would wish to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay respects to their elders past and present. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I so appreciate everybody who's here, and you're in for a great conversation, hopefully. Actually, I don't doubt that at all. I want to make a few announcements before we begin. One is, please make sure your phones are on silent, airplane mode if you can. If you can't, then at least muted would be great. The other thing is, if you have any questions for Mark, hold them till the end. We will have 10 to 15 minutes right at the end where we will have a Q&A portion. There'll be people with roving microphones to ask you questions, for you to ask the questions into. And when you do ask the questions, like make sure you say your name and stuff. It just makes it friendlier. Tonight's event is partnered with the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, which is on right now, and there's shows happening all over the city. So I hope you're going out and you're catching some of those as well. Live comedy always needs the live part to work better. So thank you so much for that.
In terms of our commitment to the comedy festival, my show starts 15 minutes after this finishes, and Sami starts 20 minutes after.
Exactly. So yeah, we're both running like idiots.
When we say we hope you come to comedy shows, we really do mean it, because
if you run with us, you can make it to our shows.
I reckon I'd get anyone in free if they ran alongside me. Yeah, I probably shouldn't make promises like that.
All right, so, of course, as you know, my name's Sami Shah, and I'm thrilled and excited, and I was honored when I was asked to do this, because Mark is one of the most celebrated comedians, not just in the UK, but here in Australia as well, where he comes so often. He's won multiple awards, and has been a regular on Mock the Week, Would I Lie to You, and Michael McIntyre's Comedy Roadshow. He's also, beyond just being an award-winning comedian, written several novels. I had to update that from 5 to 7, because he's written 2 more since my last check Wikipedia. And today we're going to be talking about all that stuff, but mostly about his new memoir, which is out now, and it is as an audible experience, and we'll get into that in a bit. And it's called The 8 Deaths and Life After Them. So please put your hands together and welcome Mark Watson.
Thanks very much.
So, all right, the first thing I want to actually get into is how people can get the memoir, because right now it's not physically available as a book.
No, which is a bad start to a book event, really. Thanks for coming. The book doesn't exist. Yes, it had a slightly complicated history, this book. It began as an Audible original, so, an audiobook alone, which you could get, which I wrote sort of during the lengthy period of the pandemic in the UK, and it came out last year under the title 8 Deaths and Life After Them, and it's now, in August, it comes out as an actual physical book under the new title Mortification, brackets 8 Deaths and Life After Them, and if it comes in another format, then they'll add another title to that, presumably, until there are more and more brackets.
The movie will be, right, exactly.
The movie, that's right. We were talking about this backstage. Putting something out as an audiobook is kind of rewarding in its own way, of course, because quite a lot of people do find it easier to listen to things than they do to read them. But we were also just saying there's no satisfaction quite like holding the book in your hand. So I'm really pleased that it does have this second lease of life as a book. Also, it's quite an unusual opportunity for an author to have, to record an audiobook, listen back to it, think, oh, no, shit, I don't like that bit, and then change it. I've had it's a rare opportunity to have it. So I've had a second go. The book is, I've rewritten quite long chunks of it. There were bits where I was too soft on people. I've really gone in hard for the book.
I was going to ask you about that, actually. Yeah, that's good to know.
I would say the audiobook at times it holds back a little bit on, and or just is kind of a little bit restrained, and it's interesting, revisiting the book, I didn't regret any of the times where I was quite frank or honest. I regretted the bits where I hadn't maybe gone hard enough with that, so I've taken the opportunity to make it more personal and, just more honest, I think you do, it's interesting, I reckon anyone, if they had the chance to reread their memoir and have another go at it, which is what I've done, they probably would reveal more the next time, because you know, again, the things you regret are the things you don't say, I think. I must say, and this is not relevant, by the way, but I've just noticed your socks, and they are terrific.
Oh, thank you.
If you can only see this at the front, but it's like sort of burgers and chips and
burgers
stuff.
and fries.
Fast food themed socks. I haven't seen anything like it. I'm glad you can't see my socks, because they're nowhere near that caliber.
Well, I'll write an audiobook about those next.
They're going in my next memoir, your socks, yeah.
Why a memoir? You've written multiple novels. You've got the stand-up shows. The stand-up shows tend to be fairly autobiographical already. So why compile all of that into this one powerful work?
Well, I was going to be flippant and say that COVID happened and you couldn't do gigs anymore, so I needed to do something. But it's not true. It was commissioned before all that happened. Although it did. Writing it during the pandemic did make it a strange experience, because the book, you know, talks about some of my low points and disappointments and what I've learned from them, and you know, trying to strike a hopeful tone. But it's difficult to do that because I was looking out the window and you know, there was nothing happening. There was no other work. I was basically trying to write something, going, but it was all right in the end. I've got my career. But then you look in the mirror and think, I haven't though. No one's got one anymore. So that also put a strange complexion on it, I think. But to come to your actual question, the reason I wanted to do it, I think, is that I was never interested in writing an autobiography or a sort of straight memoir, because quite a lot of comedians do that. And for a start, when you're in your 40s, it feels as if there's a fair bit of life still to go. You know, it feels like you should. There are people my age who have written like 2 or 3 autobiographies, and you think, Christ, how much life have you had?
It's like every second day, right? Yeah.
Do some more stuff first, surely. But then Audible asked me if I wanted to write something about my experiences as a comedian, and I thought, what I've not. As I've said, the book is called Mortification, and it's about basically the many different ways in which I've had disappointments or failures or setbacks in my career, and the things I've learned from those, and the various life lessons that I think anyone can learn from. And basically, I think what drove me to do it was thinking, people are, and I mentioned this at the start of the book, people are endlessly fascinated by stand-up, as you know. People are always asking questions about comedy, but when you read books by famous people, not just in comedy, just generally successful people, they tend to be stories of success. People, or if there are setbacks, they say, but in the end, you know, there's, and I feel that people who are successful tend to gloss over the moments in their life where things didn't go well, and to understate the amount of luck that they had. Basically, I think once you're very successful, I mean, far beyond my level of success, I think your brain edits out all the mistakes you made, the things you fucked up. You just assume that because you're successful, you've done lots of things right. I think that actually most people's lives are a tapestry of failures and disasters and setbacks, and you know, you just muddle through it as best you can. So I wanted to write a truthful sort of story of my career so far, which is not exactly a self-help book in tone, but I hope that people would read it and think, because I'm in the fortunate position of having, you know, even when you read out that introduction, I can certainly pose as someone who is successful. And it's true that I've published these novels and I've been on various TV shows and things, so my biography reads quite well, and I'm lucky to be invited to festivals like this. I have a good career by most measures, but nonetheless, a lot of my memories of my career, a lot of my experience is of the things that have gone wrong, and we briefly discussed this. I think it's the same for a lot of comedians. So I basically wanted to write a book about what it's like to be a comedian or someone in the public eye, but through the prism mostly of failure and disappointment.
Well,
because I don't think we read that enough. I hope weirdly it is comforting to people to read it and think, actually, loads of stuff has gone wrong for him.
That's just it. So the thing, and I always wonder like what it would be like for. I feel like I've had a very different experience reading or listening to this than other people might, because you know, we both do stand-up comedy, and as a comedian, there's certain things that I felt like this book was talking to me and my experience, because very particular. One of those things being, we always remember our worst gigs far better than we tend to remember our best gigs. And you've called this book The 8 Deaths, and the deaths in this term is referring to comedy deaths, when a comedian gets on stage and dies on stage. It's a very violent vernacular that we have in our industry.
It is. I talked about it in the book. It's one of the few industries where death is used as a shorthand for just having quite a bad day at the office.
And if you...
Most people don't come home and say, yeah, I really died at the chemist today. Well, unless,
And
hopefully
if you do
not.
well, you kill. If you do badly, you're bombing.
That's right, there's a violence to it, and that reflects, I think, what a high-wire act it is for a lot of people. I think if you are a comedian, you get used to that. You can't go on stage and think the stakes are that high. And it's one of the reasons I think I wanted to write about it. To other people looking in, it seems an incredibly vulnerable, precarious thing to do. And a lot of comedians do shield themselves against that vulnerability by, with aggression. In fact, it's an interesting cultural thing, this. You're right that here in Australia and in the UK, and I'd say in Canada and most places I've gigged, it's true that people tend to remember their worst gigs. And this is not a sort of piece of national stereotyping or anything, but American comics, if you hang out with them, will tend to talk about their best gigs, in my experience. It's interesting. And I don't think that's to do with Americans being intrinsically more boastful or anything. I think that there's just a culture in American entertainment of talking yourself up relentlessly because it's so competitive, because that's just the culture. If you tell a story and it ends with, and everyone hated me, Americans look at you like, what? Why are you telling me that,
Whereas
man?
if you used to tell a story here and everyone loved me, people are like, why would you say that?
Yeah. I toured with these American comics, and a couple of Brits, a couple of Americans, we would, as most comedians do, tell stories about terrible times, shaming gigs, things that we regretted. But the Americans' anecdotes would be everyone else was dying, had a horrible gig, audience was horrible. I go on, I kill. The guy comes up to me, he says, I want to give you more money for that. I get invited back, Obama is there, and you're waiting for the twist, but there is no twist. The guy's just telling a story about how he did his job really fucking well. And that is the reason that seems quite unhuman to a British comic, or I think Australian, is that, most of us are in the habit of exchanging war stories in that way. But you don't often let other people see it. I've certainly read, I've read plenty of comedians' books where they talk about a terrible gig, like I do in the first chapter, or, a tough gig on stage. But this book is also about things that I've done wrong, in like bad decisions I've made in my career and in my life, ways in which I've let myself down. I don't think you read about that much because of this thing of like bombing and killing and dying. We live in an industry where you do need to, you don't have to go full American with it, but there's a perception you need to present yourself as a success, or people won't want to watch you, to work with you. And this book is an attempt to change that perspective, that paradigm a bit, and say, hey, most success is just built on many layers of failure and disappointment.
So, and look, it is one of those things which you pointed out, your career is one that can be seen from the outside, and I'm sure, hopefully from the inside, as one full of successes as well. Is the reason why hopefully you're still finding joy in this. But failures on stage, failures in life, some of the failures you list in this book, they take a toll.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, I think all of us need to believe that the negative experiences of life are leading somewhere positive, right? You learn lessons, and of course I do believe that. I believe that I'm 43. I believe that I'm only in the past few years properly learning about who I am as a person. What I want. So I feel that as you go on in life, I do believe in the idea that life is a journey which you acquire more resources for as you go on. So that's one answer. Disappointments, you would like to think, teach you lessons. You come back, you're better the next time. But the trouble is, life isn't always like that, as everyone in this room knows. There is this, if you read the habits of successful people, or I gestured so flamboyantly there that I've upset the microphone. If you read these, or you'll see people on Twitter like high-achieving people with their lists of. There is this idea that if you work hard enough, if you learn from your mistakes, if you bounce back, eventually you'll succeed. Eventually, the story will go. And in the end, and again, what this book explores is, maybe that won't happen, or it won't happen straight away. The things you want to happen might not happen.
The thing, that's one thing I would feel like, and I'm saying this as a reader, right? So as someone who's read your work and listened to the audiobook, for me, there was still an inherent optimism in your approach to failures, because it feels like you're not giving up at any point. After the first gig, you do your first stand-up gig, you talk about this here, one of your first ones where you, as we say, you die on stage. There's crowds are booing you off. You're still here doing stand-up comedy. You didn't then become Mark Watson dentist.
No, I tried, but people booed me there as well, and which, when you're in their mouth, is much more demanding.
It's more effort, yeah.
Actually, the date of this terrible gig, which was early in my career, appears in the book, and if I'm not mistaken, it's April the 5th,
yes.
so tomorrow.
Yes, even I noted that, I was like, wow.
That's a coincidence, but tomorrow will be 19 years since the, or perhaps 18 years, 2005, since the worst gig of my life, yeah. And, well, I suppose part of the answer is that so that gig was a classic kind of young comedians horror story with people booing, as you say, and the horrible club in southeast of England. But I had actually done enough shows by that point. I was still very young, I was very new, but I did think, okay, well, I must, if that had actually been my first gig, or even in my first 10, then probably I would have been we keep saying would have been a dentist, like that represents some sort of downturn in fortunes. Actually, I have a more stable income. Yeah. But I don't think I'd be here right now. I don't know if there is a Melbourne Dentistry Festival. I certainly
they haven't booked me yet.
No, people aren't filling the town hall to watch displays of dentistry. Have you seen that guy from Japan? Amazing dentist. I suppose I had garnered just enough confidence from my experience so far to think, even though it was very painful, to think, okay, well, I must be able to keep doing this. But actually, you're right, there is a certain optimism. And I think the main reason for that is that, although I would say again that in the book version, the new manuscript version, is, I wouldn't say toned down the optimism, but listening back to the audiobook, I did feel at times as if I'd gone for the soft option of saying, right. But it was all right in the end. And I do think it's, important. So I'm very happy with where I am in my career and my life, but there are certain things which I haven't ever got at, achieved, or had access to, which I would have really liked. So, it's not, you can't pretend that everything has gone the exact way you hoped. I think that's important. But the reason I've never let it stop me from doing it, from continuing to be a comedian or author. Well, first I've been extremely lucky. Things like this thrill me. To be on the other side of the world from my home and have this many people in the room, to be able to, we don't know if any of them are enjoying it, but it doesn't matter. They're physically here. I'll have a picture for Twitter.
You're still on Twitter?
Yeah, for moments like this. So there's that I've had just enough validation along the way and support that I never felt completely hopeless. But also, I think one of my main qualities, and there are lots of things, there are lots of things in the debit column, but one of my qualities is stubbornness. I've always wanted to do this, to be a writer, a performer, and even though I've been very low on confidence and belief plenty of times, I have kept coming back because my desire to keep doing it outweighs any of those considerations. Well, also, I don't have any other plan. I don't know about you. There comes a point in your career where you think, well, shit, I don't have any other skills here, really. But yeah, I think I've just been reading the book on the craft of novel writing by Haruki Murakami, the Japanese novelist. And he talks about how when a new novelist appears who is, there's a sensation, everyone's talking about it, and it gets enormous, sells millions of copies. The hot novelist of the moment. All the existing novelists out there tend not to be jealous or bitchy or anything. There's quite a welcoming attitude among, and he says it's because they all know that very few people last the course and stay and write 10 or 12. So it's like, okay, and it's not said patronising, but it's like, you've done really well. Congratulations on your novel, but let's see you do it 10 times now. And it's the same with comedy, but particularly with writing, you need enormous staying power. And whatever else I haven't achieved, or in whatever ways I've disappointed myself, I do have a real resilience to. I will keep doing it. Like there've been periods where I haven't been published, for example, where I haven't had a publisher, where no one wanted to read the books, and in those periods I've continued writing novels. I've never stopped doing the things. And with comedy, again, when things have gone less well for me, when can't get booked on TV or people aren't coming, I'll still keep doing it. And I think that either is about real devotion, like it's the thing you most want to do in the world, or, as I say, you don't know what else to do. But they're almost the same things. I wouldn't know who I was unless I was writing. Performing less so, actually. Writing is the thing that's kind of most primal for me.
Would you self-identify as a, Mark Watson, stand-up comedian and novelist, or novelist and stand-up comedian?
Well, it's an interesting question. It depends on the context. On the landing card to get into Australia, for example, I always put writer. You don't want to put comedian there. So comedy festival, is it? Yes. Okay, got any jokes? I have, yes, but you have to pay to see them. But I never do. Even that level of sass is beyond me at customs. Of course, it is. Terrified of those guys. Please let me into your country. Mostly I do. Well, far more people in the UK see me as a comedian than an author, and people tend to be surprised to hear that I've written quite a number of novels. But actually, that's what I was doing before I was doing stand-up, really. I began writing novels in my early 20s, and then stand-up was something which I discovered, I wouldn't say quite by accident. I did want to get into comedy, but it was kind of, I didn't necessarily anticipate this going the way it did. And just because of the way comedy is, of course, things accelerate. I was invited here for the first time at 26. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe, really, that I'm able to go to different countries and tour around my home country performing comedy. I'm very grateful for it. But writing books has occupies a probably more prominent place in my heart, because when I was a kid, that's what I wanted. I used to, as I've mentioned in the novel, in the memoir, I used to write books. My dad would staple them together. I'd pretend they were in the shops. My dad was a teacher, so he'd sometimes take them in and make photocopies on the school photocopy. Looking back at poor use of their resources, also piracy. He should have been buying them, and nothing excited me more than him coming home with 10 copies of this thing. So the urge to write books was very, very deep in me. So I suppose the answer is, emotionally, I self-identify as author first and comedian afterwards. But for almost all practical purposes, I'm comedian first, and then I cram the writing in where I can.
So how do you differentiate the muscles between writing a novel when an idea comes to you? How do you know this is a novel? No, this is a stand-up comedy bit. No, this is a memoir or piece,
It's a good question, and sometimes I do catch myself writing in a novel in a way that sounds too much like stand-up, which the tone is too jokey, or there are too many obvious gags, and I try to kind of self-censor to take, because I do want the novels to sound different from my comedy. I think the answer is probably it's to do with the scale of the idea that you want to talk about. Like my stand-up shows, including the one here, tend to have some sort of theme and overriding concern. This show is about it's called Search, and it's about the different ways that my son and my dad see the universe because of their different uses of Google and that kind of thing. My son is here, by the way, but he only flew in this morning, and he's asleep back there. And that's a kind of a weighty theme. The show last year was about life expectancy and making the most of life. So the stand-up shows are always about something, but I always come away feeling as if basically my responsibility has been to make people laugh. So the gags are always first. So there are comedians, some who in an hour's stand-up show are able to delve so deeply into a big theme that you come away feeling, Hannah Gadsby's a famous example, but there are plenty of, just among Australians, I think of quite a number of examples. And I try to do that, but I don't always feel as if I've managed to do that. I always am confident that people will come away having laughed and had a good time, but I often don't feel that I've explored anything as substantial as I would like. So, for example, my last novel was called Contacts, and it's about a guy who is depressed and sends a text saying he's going to kill himself, and it goes to his whole phone book. He sends it to 150 people, and the action of the novel is just over one night, all of these people trying to talk him down, but they can't find him. This is all done by. So that book is about modern loneliness, technology, the way we use it, the way we could use it to build connection. It's about human connection. Basically, there's loads of stuff that I was feeling that I wanted to talk about, which I just don't think I can get through in a comedy show. And most of the books are like that. Most of my books are about relationships or being alive, being human in ways which I'm just not confident I'll really get into in a stand-up show.
Is there overlap? Does some of
Yeah.
it? I feel like some of it seeps into the shows, and then some of the themes overlap.
Definitely. The last before here, the last stand-up show I brought to Melbourne was in 2019, and I asked the audience on the way in to write unusual things about themselves on cards, unusual quirks or opinions, anything about it's unusual, and I would weave those in to the show. That show was all about, again, the relationships we have with one another and our responsibility to each other as humans. And my novels are also about that. So yeah, there's definitely overlap. But I think basically the novels are the space that exists for me to get into stuff that is difficult to make jokes about.
So
yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned Haruki Murakami, and I thought of Murakami when I was reading your book, because you talk about running and
Yeah.
that connection it has to your thinking process and your and mindfulness almost, if I may. Is that part of self-care when it comes to dealing with failures, normalizing disappointment?
Yeah, running is quite a big thing for me. While I'm here, I run around the Tan track there, which is easily my favourite running track in the world, although no, it's not when you're doing it. It's horrible, but I love it. I'm in a sort of 15-year love-hate relationship with that track. And yes, while I'm there, while I'm doing any run, actually, the Tan is a good example because you're just going in a circle, and I know the track extremely well, so I don't think about where I'm going or what. I don't even think about my surroundings. My mind is almost completely blank. I think Murakami runs extraordinary long distances, of course, and
he does ultra marathons.
He's one of these mad. He's in his 70s, I think. And yeah, he runs like 30, 40 mile stretches. Yeah. I've never been that kind of guy. I'm a middle distance runner, but yeah, what it gives me is I don't really think at all when I'm running. Some people use walks or runs or exercise to kind of get their thoughts straight, or like some writers, as they're running, they process ideas, but I don't do that at all. I basically clear my mind, and all I'm thinking about is how fast I'm running and how long, and just the run itself. Or if I'm running here, I'll think, oh, there's the smell of eucalyptus, or that's a hell of a big dog coming towards me, or here's that hill. I swore I'd never do that again. So, but like all my thoughts are on the actual run, and there aren't, because of the sort of brain I've got. When this is not some sort of boast, it's just I find it hard to switch off from. I'm sure there are plenty of people like this in this room. So if I were just going for a long walk, for example, I still would be mentally chewing over the things. But whereas running is a tough enough exercise that I am almost free of all thoughts during it. And there aren't many things like that. In fact, I've had a therapist for the past couple of years, and one of the things I've talked about was like, how can I access that sort of mental space? You can't always go for a run. I can't remain on the run for hours every day just so I don't. And it's not as if I'm frightened of my thoughts, but I do think your brain can be just quite a chaotic place to live. And especially if you're thinking about what we're talking about, failures, upsets, disappointments. I find I'm not very good at, it's easy to write a book where you say, and what I learned from that was, but those lessons, of course, don't present themselves very easily in the moment. Very often you feel like the longer you sit and chew over something, the worse it is. So running is the best way I've found of just blowing all thoughts out of my head. But of course, when you come back, you still are the same person. So that's when you need to work on other aspects of your life.
Well, so I mean, there's that thing, right? With those thoughts that you are running to clear out are the fuel for your work. I mean, your work speaks to a lot of your comedy, your writing, and everything speaks to certain stresses in the world that you're worried about, anger you might have at everything from the way things are going on a large scale, a macro level, down to interpersonal relationships. Like, would you get rid of those?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I often think, and certainly in the worst periods of my life, I have thought, I wish I didn't have this brain. I wish I didn't have such tendency to think about things. I wish, again, this is not to say that I'm some sort of that I'm smarter than, clearly not smarter than an enormous number of other people, but I envy. So it sounds patronising, but it's not. I genuinely do envy people who are able to brush thoughts aside quite quickly, or just get back on it. A good example is like sports people. I watch a lot of sport, and people think that, or not always, but a lot of people think that stereotype sports people as being stupid or just like mentally like very one-paced. And for a start, a lot of them aren't. If you hear them interviewed, I mean, David Pocock's done a fair job down here. To take one example of a sports person not being stupid, but also that discipline of, like, if you're a cricketer and you're out first ball and then you've got to go back out there and bat again, or you're a tennis player and you have to serve for like all these moments of where you have to like sports, the biggest example I think of every failure you've had, you have to forget about it and go again, sometimes instantly. Like if I was a cricketer and I was out for a duck but I'm back out for the second innings, especially if you're playing Australia and like everyone behind you is talking shit at you, like. I'd without doubt crumble. I do not have that ability to. So I'm fascinated by people who something can go really wrong and they get up and act as if that never. Not just sports people. Loads of people are able to do that. So I constantly wish I was one of those people. But you're right. You wouldn't want to wish away the side of you that reflects on and processes negative emotions, because that is where work comes to, where your art comes from. Yeah. So basically, if you want to write at all, I think you need to be able to, store all of the deepest, sometimes most challenging, frightening things that you're thinking about, but you don't want to live with them 24/7. You need a place to put them. And obviously writing is a place to put them. Writing novels is a way of, writing anything is a way of working out those difficult, complicated thoughts. But you also need kind of a holding area for them, and that's maybe what running gives you.
So one of the things that failure is very subjective.
Yeah.
Because, and it's very clear, and you make this point repeatedly as well, what you think of yourself as a failure for is sometimes you're just seeing someone else's success and going, I wish I had that.
Yes.
How do you stop that from turning into resentment, or do you?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Okay.
No, I do try to. Well, this is one of the defining questions of a comedian, of being a comedian my sort of age. Like, so for example, in that brief summary of my career, you said, he's a regular on and the various shows, and one of them was Michael McIntyre's Comedy Roadshow. Michael McIntyre is a contemporary of mine, and there's a story in the memoir about.
You don't name him in it.
No, I do not know, because I'm well aware of the lawyers behind him. Very few comedians.
Spoiler alert! Everyone keep quiet about this. Yeah.
I've written the book in. I think it works quite well. There are numerous anecdotes which reflect badly on comedians, and none of the comedians are named, but with minimal research, you could work out who they were. It's quite interesting. I've never had a legal check on a book before, but because this is non-fiction, there is a legal department looking over it, and repeatedly they flagged things up and said, I'm like, yeah, but they're not named. And the person, the legal reader, who's not a person that's interested in comedy, says, yeah, but I Googled it, and within 30 seconds I was able to narrow it down to 2 people, and of those 2 people, I think it's this one. And you're like, yeah, okay, fine. So the disguises aren't as watertight as I might have hoped. But actually, this is not a story to the detriment of, perhaps not everyone here is familiar with it, Michael McIntyre is probably the most successful, rich and famous comedian in the UK, with potential exception of Ricky Gervais, but they're not quite in the same category. And Michael and I, the story is, Michael and I did a gig, in a thankless gig in, well, not far outside London, but far enough that we needed to drive. He gave me a lift back. We're both young comedians. There'd been 40 or 50 people there. People didn't really like it. It was all right. We got paid hardly anything. And it's one of those moments where you, on the way back, you think, why am I doing this really? Is this a good way to, am I squandering my university education? And Michael said, I just know I'm going to make it. I know I'm better than this. We'd both done equally well on the night. There was no obvious gap in ability. But he said, I'm too good for this, and I think I'm. And he wasn't really being boastful. I don't think he sometimes comes across as a bit of, but he's not. He just had complete confidence in the idea that, what they call it, manifesting or visualization. He's like, I can see a world beyond this where I am hugely successful and famous and rich, and I was thinking, I think I'm roughly the same ability level as you, but I can't see that world. And if you fast forward 5 years, he does live in that world. He's a multimillionaire. He sells that arenas world, and I'm still me. And so it's, I've thought about that a lot, not resentfully, but I'm just interested in whether it would have been different if was it because of his, because you hear all the time, look at where you want to be, project into a successful, all of it. And it mostly sounds like I mean, not complete bullshit, but obviously, like, it feels like a very limited idea because we all know that you only have to watch the X Factor, whatever, like Idol, and there's loads of people going, I know this is my future, I'm that guy, and they're not. Almost all of them aren't, but he was, and I witnessed it, and now he is, and he still is, and he will be forever, and I'm not. So that's interesting, and I mean, this wasn't quite answering your question, but it's related because he's a guy who was a contemporary of mine. I talked about this in my last show. There are several comedians that I began my career with who are now global stars and huge household names in the UK and can tour all over the world and like have achieved all of the things that one would dream of. And I'm not in that category. I have had a pretty good career. I'm doing well. And this is your point. Like your success and failure are always just index linked to other people you see around.
Because there must be many more comedians who aren't at any level.
Precisely. There are certainly,
and they're looking at all of you going, I would kill for any of that.
Absolutely. And I have enough perspective to know that. And it's not as if I think I'm the best comedian to emerge in my generation. I don't look at these people and think, and that is an important distinction. I very, very rarely look at anyone and think, why have I not got what they, like, as in, they're not good enough, they're not as good as me, I'm better than that. Mm-hmm. That's when you are in the realms of bitterness. But I do look at other people and think, did I do something wrong which they did right? Is there something that they worked out that I didn't? And I think the answer, and is what I've tried to wrestle with in this book, I think the answer is normally no. The answer is they just lived their life and you lived yours. The sooner you stop seeing your life as a competition with other people, basically the better. That's almost the entire point of the memoir. But still, who can actually live like that? It's very hard not to look around. I suppose that, again, it's interesting, isn't it? If you, like, again, if I were a tennis player, I'd be able to say, all right, I'm number 26 in the world, whatever. I'm certainly not 26th comedian in the world, but, like, you know, you have a ranking. You can, or golf, or anything where it's, you know, done by money or points or whatever. You can say, okay, he's better than me, but I'm better than her, but she's better, and so on. Or not better, but like there's where the rankings are. With comedy, those rankings still exist, but they're all in your head. They're in everyone's head, and so you. And the trouble is, for most comedians, you look at people like Michael and say, right, he's doing better than me. But then you also look at younger people and think, he also is, because he'll soon. That's the other thing. I've been coming to this festival for, 17 years. I've been doing comedy for 20 years. It's inevitable that you not only do your contemporaries, some of them become more successful than you, but you see new people coming through. And I remember watching James Acaster. I don't know if some of you will be familiar with him. Like, he opened for me. He did like 5 minutes opening for me when I was recording a DVD, we used to say. So he was like as underdog as possible. And it's easy to say with hindsight, but even watching from the wings, I thought, this guy's pretty good. I'm glad he's only got 5 minutes. And and I then did a gig with him where he did 20 minutes. And again, I was the headliner, but he was the outstanding comedian in the night. And again, Ramesh Ranganathan, Nish Kumar from my series of Taskmaster, again, two British comedians who I championed both of them quite hard when they were starting out, and then I had the experience of watching them become more famous than me. It's a weird feeling when you've really pulled for someone early on, and then you're like, you don't really need me to do that anymore. It's or another example pertinent to this would be, I don't know if you're familiar with the book by Adam Kay, This Is Gonna Hurt, which is the biggest non-fiction book of the century in the UK. Adam's a friend of mine. I'd seen him do a live show, and I introduced him to my publisher, the same person who's publishing this book. And again, I had that warm glow of like, I introduced them, and now they're doing really well. And then a couple of years later, you're like, that's very well, actually. They're at the Oscars now, and I'm not. And so I've had quite a lot of experiences like that where, and basically, you cannot continue comparing yourself to these people, obviously, because, for a start, it's just not a healthy thing to do. But also, as you say, that there might well be things about your life which they would envy. So you just have to constantly remind yourself that you should not measure your success by anyone else's. You should simply... If I look at what I was hoping for when I was 25... and look at where I am now, I have got not all of it. There's plenty of things I've not fulfilled, but I'd be pretty happy with it. Mm-hmm. But the trouble is, I'm comparing it with the absolute best imaginable dream I had when I was 25. And most of us don't get that. But as you said originally, that isn't actually failure. It's just that your life cannot live up to, and probably Michael McIntyre or anyone you could name, their life also doesn't live up to their wildest dreams, because that's the point of wildest dreams. They're pretty hard to live up to.
So I want to, my plan was originally to ask you a question, which, the book is about that question, which comedians get asked all the time, is what's the worst gig you ever did, and what's the worst death you ever had? And I was going to ask you the same thing, even though the book is that. I thought you'd recount one of those. But then I started thinking, why not flip it? Why not do the American thing and ask you instead, what's the best gig you've ever had? Well, the one where you really felt, I'm where I'm meant to be right now.
Yeah, it's much more difficult, isn't it? But I think, I'm reluctant to use this as an answer because it happened a long time ago, and I'd like to think there's certainly been more recent examples, and actually, as recently as, So I suppose there are a couple of different answers. I've done quite a number of these 24-hour-long shows, and which is kind of began as a gimmick at the Edinburgh Festival and become sort of my signature move. And during those, I always feel extremely kind of happy with where I am, because that is a thing which nobody else could do, or no one else wants to do, and which I alone can offer, and it attracts relatively small, a couple of hundred people, but those people are really, really into it, and those. Or again, in recent times, during the pandemic, I started playing this online game called No More Jockeys with two of my friends. Yeah, and that, again, reaches a quite specific, small cult audience. But again, the people that like it, love it, and no one else could have done it. Because, again, no one else. So those in recent times, those have been. But if I had to pick one stand-up gig, it actually is 2007, and it was, I don't know if you've heard of it, but Sydney. Which is kind of minor town just northeast of here, and the reason, there's a number of things. It was the Opera House for a start, and of course not the big room, but in the UK people don't know there's more than one space in the Opera House, so
we've all used that one.
Yeah, right, even here, right?
Yeah.
So as far as anyone's concerned, I had
yes, mummy, I'm at the Opera House.
Yes, a month-long residency at the Opera House, yeah. Oh, no, hang on. I stayed in Sydney for a month. I have been on the main stage doing 5 minutes in like a gala show, and that is one hell of a rush, I have to say. Probably shouldn't have chosen to sing opera, but, like, when you're there, should have stuck to comedy. But yes, I had on my second visit, the comedy festival produced me in Sydney. I had a 2-week run in the one of the studio spaces there, probably 150 people. But for a start, showing up at the Opera House every day, when I'd only been doing comedy for 5 years, was mind-boggling. Still is. I much prefer Melbourne to Sydney. I'm not sort of trying to suck up that I've been on record. I do like Sydney, but I mean, really, the two of you should. They're both nice places. You need to sort it out. But Melbourne is a second home to me. Nonetheless, the Opera House does have you feel like, I must have done something right in my life here. Yeah. But that was my first time there, so it was kind of exciting for a start. But then, so I played there for 2 weeks, and at the end of that period, it was Saturday night. I looked into the audience, and I sort of broke off halfway through a sentence and said, "I think that's my mum." But it just can't. It can't be. It's impossible. But it was. My mum had impulsively come to Sydney, and this is not that we're not a family with particularly like financial means, or we're also not that impulsive. It was very uncharacteristic, but it did happen. She said to my dad, "Can you believe Mark is in the Opera House? Imagine if I could see that." And he basically encouraged her to take a week off work, fly down. She had old friends in New South Wales. All of this without my knowledge. And so I had a sort of emotional remainder of the show. I mean, it probably wasn't a great gig for anyone else. But I had this intense feeling that there's sort of, well, as you know, when you do this, you spend a fair bit of time thinking, I hope this looks all right to my parents. I was so lovingly brought up. They were so supportive of my ambitions. I'm constantly thinking, hope this looks like I'm doing all right. I am doing all right. And then once you're like, oh yeah, I'm going down to Australia to do gigs, of course, you feel like, okay, this looks good. Mm-hmm. But then being in the Opera House and her in the audience all proud, it was a different level. And of course, the gig after that went very well because I endlessly referred back to my mum. She was also really far forward. And afterwards, she said, "Oh, my friend bought the tickets." Of course, my friend. I would never have bought tickets there, but my friend bought them in the second row. But that had to be a lie. I knew she'd. So that was. It was a combination of the mind-blowing surprise of my mum being there, and the fact I was in the Opera House, and I was 27 and couldn't even believe I was in Australia. All of those things mean it's probably not the best. It's certainly not technically the best gig. I think I'm getting better as I go on. You'd hope you get better as you go on. So in the past 2 or 3 years, I've had gigs that were performance-wise, for sure, the best, if you could be objective about these things. But that's probably the one show I look back on and think, if I could relive all 60 minutes of a show, it would be that. Except I'd need to relive them not knowing what the twist was.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be boring.
We have time for a few questions. We have people with roving mics. If you put your hand up, my a few requests would be: do say your name when you ask a question. Make it a question, not a manifesto. It happens.
You've done these events before.
Yeah. And try to keep it to one question at a time. So we got someone right up here in front. If we can get a mic here. Yeah. Just keep your hand up. Sorry. Your arm might get exhausted, but yes.
Hi, my name's Gene. I wondered, do you ever think you could have done a normal job? And we were at your show on Sunday, and I was wondering, how do you string all those ideas together for an hour? The sequencing of it is really impressive.
Oh, thank you. If everyone could begin their questions by advertising my show, that would be great. Jim, was it? Gene. Thanks, Gene. Well, I suppose to take the second half, basically a show comes together with patience. You have to basically put it on stage, not very well formed, and it's just a couple of ideas, and then gradually you try. Different comedians approach it in different ways. Some people do just sit and write themselves basically a script, but my way of putting it, I don't know how you do it, Sami, but my way of stringing ideas together is just to try to build one idea on top of another, until it starts to resemble a show. And the more I do that in front of an audience, the better. Some comedians will try out new bits, and I do sometimes do that because you have to. But my favourite way of building a show is to just make myself do an hour. Make the audience suffer for an hour, until it's there, until it sort of. As for whether I could have done a proper job, I mean, I was fortunate that I threw myself into this. Well, I was fortunate, but also just very determined. I lived off no money for several years in order to do this, and I mean, I did various jobs just part-time. I worked, I think the worst but also most fascinating job was filing death certificates, which I did. I did a month of that as a summer job, although you wouldn't have known it was the summer. It was in this freezing cold. The warehouse was so cold you had to wear a coat even in the summer, and you couldn't help thinking it was the chill of death. And that was kind of, I mean, sometimes comedians or people who fancy themselves as artists say, "Oh, I could never have done a 9-to-5 job. I could never be tied down that way," and it comes off quite pretentious because loads of people have to do that, and also if you don't have to do that, loads of people enjoy that, and also that is how most work is. So I would never put myself. I'd never say, "Oh, I could never have done it." If I had ended up doing that, it would have been fine. But I think having done comedy for this long, you would find it pretty weird to go back to. I think one of the things I relish about my job is that it is not that it's not 9 to 5 in a sort of, again, in a patronising way. Just most weeks are different from the previous week for me. I'm in different places, or I'm touring, or there are unexpected things come up. So I think if I were to do a proper job now in inverted commas, it needs to be something still with quite a degree of variety and unexpected things happening. I think I'd struggle to do a job where much the same stuff happened every day. But again, that's not to
politics,
for example. Yeah. That does seem like really, really boring. Yeah. I mean, of course, politics is its original aims are noble. You're serving the people, but yeah, most of what you're doing is. I think anything where I was relied upon to basically deliver the same tasks every day, I would. Well, some of you might have seen the show Taskmaster. I am not really a tasks person, and the longer you do a job or exist in an environment where everything is fluid and changing. Of course, what it also means is sometimes there's no security at all. Sometimes you don't know where. So there are big downsides to not having routine. But I love the fact that I travel as much as I do and that I'm in different places. And I would find it now quite odd to be in the same workspace every day, I think. Yeah.
Do we have another question? Someone over there? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Hi, Alex here. Thank you, gentlemen.
Hi.
Thanks for coming back to Australia, Mark.
Thank you, Alice. I mean, you didn't make it happen, but you're part of how I can do it.
He was the immigration
We'll come
officer.
and
Yeah,
see
actually, thanks for processing my forms, Alex. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you talk about sports people and their ability to put the thought out of their mind so that they can bat the next ball or serve the next tennis ball. But it seems like comedy is very much the same, and that you're the only one on stage with a mic, and if a joke bombs, you have to keep going. How are they different to you?
Well, actually, yeah, you're right. In a way, it's true. Like, I do remember having a feeling of after that terrible gig, which is described in the memoir, that when I was young, in fact, I had to go back to the same club the next night. I'd been booked for the weekend, and it was a Friday night, was a disastrous gig. So I remember the whole of the Saturday kind of like stomach churning and thinking, I don't want to walk into that room again. And it was all right, but it still wasn't great. It wasn't for several shows after that I had a really good one. I suppose the key difference, I think, is, as you get more successful or better known, of course, there's more pressure in a sense because people know who you are. But when I was starting out, I used to think to myself, no one here knows who I am or will ever see me again. Potentially, I lived in Cambridge, but I would come down to London to perform. So I'd walk into these clubs where I didn't know a soul there. I didn't know any of the other comedians. So even if the gig went really badly, the next week I'd at least been in a different place. People had no expectations of me. I think that's the difference. Like, whereas if you're Rory Burns and you're out first ball of an Ashes series, I cannot imagine. Like, he's got a bat in the second innings, but then he's also got a bat in the next 10. He's got to do press conference. He's got to walk around Australia and Australians, of course, very, very good sports cricket-wise, but still, there'll be the occasional whisper of, like, you're shit, mate. And, or like if you're at Wimbledon or Australian Open and you've served the first one into the net, that second serve, there's 15,000 people thinking, oh, you don't want to do that again, mate. You know, at least with comedy, however badly it goes, you can walk away, come back the next day, a new set of people. Something about the sport makes you accountable to, to fans, to people that are depending on you. That's another difference, actually, I think. I think what I would find impossible about being a sports person is that idea that if you lose, you've disappointed thousands of people. At least I've just disappointed myself and a couple of hundred other people who paid their money wrongly. That is a thing that a lot of people find appealing about comedy, the autonomy of it. It feels like a lot of response. In fact, I said this in the book. There's a lot of talk about it must be terrifying. I couldn't do that. And for sure, there's a certain anxiety attached to people looking at you and waiting to be made to laugh. But it still is, your responsibility is just to yourself and to them. It's not to like a wider world out there. Whereas, if you're a doctor operating on someone or you're flying a plane or something, those people are in your hands in a much more frightening way. But again, even if you're playing for Hawthorn, there's 50,000 people go to bed angry if you drop a ball. I couldn't be doing that. It'd be 300 people go to bed angry, and they won't be that angry. They'll go to the pub and say, "Oh, it's all right." So the stakes of comedy look high when you're the only person up there, but they're not high compared with the job where there are like huge consequences for people's lives. That's how I try to rationalise what I'm doing.
I think we have time for one final question, only because Mark has to run to his gig after
And
this.
so do you.
And me as well, yes. We have one right here.
Hi, thanks so much for being so natural and sincere. I liked your story about your mother in Sydney when she saw your show. Just wanted to know, are you from Kent in England?
From Kent?
Yes.
It's funny you should ask. I am not. I'm from Bristol in England, the southwest of England, but both the story I told about that worst ever gig and the story about the miserable gig that I drove back from with Michael McIntyre, those took place in Kent. So I do have a historical tie to the area, yeah. Why did you ask?
Well, because your accent sounded as though you might be from there.
Oh, I see. Yeah, my accent is quite nondescript because although I was born in Bristol, which does have quite a distinct accent, the accent of Stephen Merchant, to give you a famous example, my parents themselves were not from there, my mother's well. So my accent is sort of a bit of a mishmash.
Oh, it's ever so nice anyhow. Thanks
thank
very
you.
much.
What a lovely question.
Mark, before we start running through the streets of Melbourne, where can people find you for the rest of the festival?
My show is frighteningly soon at the lower town hall, which is, well, we'll find out exactly how far away it is from here, but I would say about 7 minutes. And yours is at the Chinese Museum.
I'm at the Chinese Museum
Yes.
at 7:50, yes.
So, yeah, please do come. I mean, it's sort of different tone, from hopefully slightly more laughs than this, but on the other hand, I don't even get to sit down. Actually, this makes you realise comedy is quite hard work. This is this is really lovely.
We need chairs.
Yeah, you just talk about yourself, and well, I suppose that's comedy as well, actually. But yeah, I'm taking one of these chairs with me, yeah.
Mark Watson, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I will...
Oh, we need a picture for the tweets. Yeah.